All right, y'all. So it is 11 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get going with our presentation today. So welcome one and all to our presentation on how to read your pit report data. So my name is Alex Paredes. I am the data coordinator here at Texas Homeless Network. And I'm here with my lovely supervisor, Kira Henderson, who is our Directors of Systems Change. And they're going to be presenting alongside me as well today. So I want to mention that you can also you can leave your questions in the chat, please. If you have any questions at any point during this presentation, just pop them in the chat, and we're going to be periodically addressing those. And we're also going to be holding some time at the very end of our presentation for a quick Q&A. So if you want to save your questions for then, that's fine as well. But we're going to be taking questions today in the chat. So I also want to mention that if you'd like to download today's PowerPoint materials, they're going to be in the module below the chat, and you can go ahead and download those now if you'd like. So you can reference them at any time later on. And I'd also like to mention we're going to be recording this. Presentation, so you can reference it at any time as well. And feel free to follow along with your own pit reports. We're going to have page numbers for each section of the pit report in the bottom left corner on particular slides. So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and get going with our presentation. It's good to see you all here this morning. All right, so let's go over our agenda for today. We're going to start with a quick overview of the pit count, just to prime our minds. We're going to go into a review of the different report types that you should have received. We're going to be giving an overview of our first page. We're going to talk a little bit about our data quality section. And we're going to give a breakdown of the different types of households and subpopulations that you should be seeing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what to do with your pit data and how to find talking points towards the end. And then we'll have a wrap up and Q&A. So please leave any questions that you'd like in the chat, and we'll be addressing them periodically. All right. So to prime our minds before we dive into this presentation, I want to give us the who, what, when, where, why of the pit count. So the who is individuals and families residing in unsheltered locations such as cars, parks, streets, sidewalks, and other places not meant for human habitation, as well as individuals and families residing in sheltered locations such as emergency shelters and transitional housing. So the pit count aims to provide a snapshot of the individuals and families experiencing homelessness within the geographic area over one night. So that's our what. The when is the last 10 nights in January. Our where is the Texas Balance of State COC. So the pit report occurs across geography and communities like yours. And on the screen, you can see a screenshot of the actual survey results from our mobile app. And our why. So for awareness, in order to advocate to our local governments, in order to understand the extent of homelessness by determining the number of people experiencing homelessness within our geography, to secure funding as the data can be used to secure grant funding, and for engagement as the pit count encourages our communities to get involved in ending homelessness. So we want to account for the services that our communities provide and understand how homelessness changes across numerous variables. All right, so before we go into our report types, I want to mention that some of you might have received only a sheltered report or only an unsheltered report and no combined report. So this is because there were only respondents from one of those particular categories within your geography. So with that being said, here are the three types of pit reports that we send out to y'all. So we send out a sheltered report, which contains all the data for all the folks that are sheltered on the night of the count. So this includes people in emergency shelters and transitional housing. We have the unsheltered reports, which contain the data for all the folks that are living in a place not meant for human habitation on the night of the count. So like I mentioned, this includes people living on the streets, living in a homeless encampment, living in an abandoned building, and other places not meant for human habitation. And then you have the combined report. So the combined report contains the data for both sheltered and unsheltered folks in your region or geographic area. So if you want to find total demographic data for a particular population within your region, perhaps you want to find the total number of people of a particular gender, or if you want to find the total number of people of a particular race or ethnicity, the combined report is where you should start. All right, I want to see if we have any questions in chat before we move on. Doing good, doing good. All right. I don't see anybody typing, so I'll go ahead and move on to our next slide. So on our first page of the report, you will see a geography for this report in the middle, as well as the type of report you're viewing at the top. So as you can see on this example that I have here on this slide, we are viewing a combined report as stated at the top, and the geography is for all the geographies within the Texas Bounds of State COC. And you can see that the BOS COC is highlighted in blue, and on your reports, your geography should also be highlighted in blue in the middle. So the first page also gives you a basic breakdown of the populations of your geographic region based on age and a few subpopulations such as chronically homeless and homeless veterans. So if you want to know the specifics about how chronically homelessness is defined, in the chat we're going to link a HUD document that explains the definition. And I've also received a couple of questions about why the three age categories such as adults, youth, and children do not add up to the total population of the report at the very top of this table. So this is because homeless youth, due to their age range, are 18 to 24, which means that they're already included in the adults category since they're over the age of 18. So this means in order to find that total, all you have to do is add up the adults and the children. So with that being said, below this population table, we can also see a bar chart of that population breakdown, including the subpopulations that we just mentioned. Okay, I want to stop here again really quickly and see if we have any questions in the chat. Seems like we're doing pretty good so far. Thank you, Kira, for linking that HUD document. Okay, I don't see anybody typing, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. All right, so let's move on to our second page of our reports. This is the data quality section. So when looking at the data quality section, it's very important to note how the report counts errors. So errors are only counted when a response is left blank and only blank. So there are certain instances where a respondent might answer don't know or refused, and this is not represented within the data quality check section. It will only count an error when the response for a particular question is left blank. I'd also like to note that the don't know and refused responses are also not represented anywhere else on the report. So sometimes your totals for certain demographics might not add up to your grand total because of this complexity related to how the reports count blanks and don't know/refused responses. So some of these data quality issues can be mitigated in the future by working towards comprehensiveness when gathering data. So our goal is to have as few missing data elements as possible. Even though we can't get everybody to answer every single question, we want to, at the very least, give them the opportunity to answer every single question. So some volunteers might skip these questions in order to swiftly move through the survey and gather as much data and as much respondents as possible. And it's important that we, as our PIT leads, encourage our volunteers to be comprehensive and ask all the questions if possible. So I'd like to stress that even though we want to give respondents the opportunity to answer all the questions, some people might not want to answer certain questions about their gender, race, or ethnicity, and this is perfectly okay and to be expected. You know, as some people might not know the answers off the top of their head, and others might simply not want to answer, and that's perfectly fine as well. So let's go ahead and continue. So before we go into the household types, I just want to quickly first point out the difference between a household and a person. It's pretty self-explanatory. Households are families, and persons are the individuals that make up those families. And the reason this report is broken down this way, because this is how we report our data to HUD in these three broad household types. So our three household types are households with children, which are households that have at least one person over the age of 18 and one person under the age of 18. Then we have households without children, which has members that are only adults over the age of 18. And then households with only children, that are all children under the age of 18. And this is how we report our data to HUD. So each household on the report will have its own demographic breakdown for gender, race, and ethnicity. So if you want to know the totals for any of these demographics, you're going to have to add them up across the three main household categories that we talked about on the previous slide. The reports don't give us a page for total demographic data for all households, such as total race, total age, ethnicity, and gender. So in order to find those total demographic data for all households, we need to manually add them up across those three broad household types for each demographic. So we plan on putting in a request with our vendor SimTech to make a total households page a feature on future reports, but there are no guarantees that we can integrate this into future PIT reports, as it's kind of out of our hands and in the hands of SimTech. So it's important to note that for these demographics, that sometimes a respondent might answer a question with more than one choice. So say, for example, someone might identify as multiple races. So this report does not classify people under multiple categories in these kinds of situations. So if someone selects more than one race, they're going to be automatically categorized as having multiple races. The gender question works in a similar fashion in that if somebody selects two or more gender options, it will count them under the gender other than singularly female or male category that you can see here on this table. So if you want to see each individual response for these demographics, knowing that it will be greater than the total number of people within your geographic area, just please let us know and we can send over an Excel spreadsheet with that information. All right, I want to stop here again really quickly and see if we have any other questions in the chat. Still doing good. All right, I don't see anybody else typing, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. All right, so let's talk about those subpopulations that we mentioned. So there are several different types of subpopulations accounted for within our PIT reports and when we gather data on the night of the count. So the PIT reports, they're going to also give you a breakdown of veteran households and children, the PIT reports are also going to give you a breakdown of veteran households with and without children. Sorry about that. There are also two youth pages as well, one for unaccompanied youth and one for parenting youth. So, one for unaccompanied youth and one for parenting youth. So unaccompanied youth are people between the ages of 0 to 24 who are unaccompanied on the night of the count, meaning that they are without their parents or guardians. And the parenting youth are people between the ages of 18 to 24 with at least one child under the age of 18. So it's important to note which subpopulations overlap with the three main household types that we talked about earlier. And this is where there might be some of confusion of how these subpopulations overlap with the different types of broad households that we talked about earlier. So veteran households with at least one child and one adult, and parenting youth, where the parents are 18 years and older, are going to overlap with the households with at least one child and one adult category. So veteran households without children and unaccompanied youth 18 and older are going to overlap with the households without children category. And the unaccompanied youth under the age of 18 and parenting youth, where the parents are under the age of 18, are going to overlap with the households with only children category. All right, so let's talk about the very last page on our PIT reports. So at the very end of our PIT reports is a section called Additional Homeless Populations. So these include people with serious mental illnesses, substance abuse disorder, HIV or AIDS, and domestic violence survivors. So you will see another bar chart below this table that has the individuals living with a chronic condition and domestic violence survivors highlighted there in orange. So the orange just stands for people who are living with a chronic condition, who responded yes to that particular question regarding their status with that particular chronic condition, or if they're domestic violence survivors. So before we move on, and I pass the presentation off to Kira, I want to see if we have any other questions before we go ahead and move forward. All right, still doing good. All right, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to my wonderful supervisor, Kira.
Thanks, Alex. Also, y'all are making it very easy on us today. We were prepping for quite a bit, for having y'all throw questions at us. So hopefully it means that everything's making sense. But as Alex has reiterated, please, please, please feel free to type in any questions into the chat as we go. So now for my section, before we get into our discussion about how to find talking points, as well as my personal tips and tricks on presenting your data, I want to take some time to remind folks about some of the variables that your communities may have encountered throughout the 2022 PIT season. I'm starting here because depending on the variables that were at play in your community, you may decide you want to limit the scope of your analysis or your search for talking points. On the screen are some of the variables broken down by sheltered and unsheltered count based off of the information that was reported to me throughout the season. However, some of these factors may have affected both of your counts. For example, the severe winter weather on both pit dates might not only have affected your unsheltered count, because volunteers may have been unable to go out and survey, or because our unhoused neighbors may have been forced to relocate and you didn't plan to cover those areas, but also that severe winter weather could have affected shelter staff's ability to conduct surveys because of the influx of clients due to inclement weather. Additionally, as we all know and as we talked about throughout the season, COVID-19 had some significant impacts on both counts, which ranged the spectrum from affecting volunteer recruitment to staff turnover at shelters, the closure of certain sheltered projects, and even the pivoting for some projects to hotel or motel projects or vouchers. So now that we've taken the time to acknowledge some of the variables that may have affected your count, let's move into discussing the ways you can strategically analyze your data. This first slide goes through the most commonly requested analysis we get, which is a comparison of PIT data year to year. Now regarding the unsheltered data, as a reminder, there was no unsheltered PIT count in 2021. So this would mean that to look at trends over time, you would have to compare your 2022 unsheltered data to your 2020 unsheltered data. THN recommends that comparing current unsheltered data to pre-pandemic unsheltered data be done sparingly and strategically because of the number of ways COVID-19 has significantly altered the unsheltered PIT count in particular. Now, if we think about the sheltered count instead, the 2020 sheltered count, as a reminder, was conducted prior to the onset of the pandemic. The 2021 sheltered count was conducted a year into the pandemic. Something that you may find is a dramatic change from 2021 to 2022. Highlighted some of the examples of the reasons for that are on the previous slide. But let's say you were to take a step back and compare your 2020 sheltered data to your 2022 sheltered data. They may actually be more consistent and demonstrate a less drastic change. If this is the case for your community, it may be worthwhile to highlight that in your presentation because of the very specific ways COVID-19 affected sheltered capacity, which historically in many of your communities is a fairly consistent data element in your shelters. So on the bottom of this slide, what you see here is a percent change formula, as well as an example description that we are putting on our infographics to discuss data this year. The really cool thing about all of the analysis that I cover in this presentation is that it doesn't require this high-level complex data analysis experience, and it doesn't really require too much legwork. Many of the data points you may be hoping to find can come from simple formulas like this one, and the extra great thing about this is if for some reason you lose access to this presentation, you forget everything that we talked about, percent change formula and some of the other formulas I go over are something that you can easily find on Google, and you can either do it yourself manually or there's tons of free websites that will help you calculate this with just plugging in the numbers yourself. How about we now move into talking about how you can figure out your talking points using nothing more than the reports you have already received. The second most common talking point I'm asked to go over is what the percentage is of a particular group in relation to the full population. Examples of this are listed on this slide, including what percentage of adults are experiencing homelessness for the first time, or even going a step deeper to find out what the percentage is of a population in relation to another subpopulation. The example being the percent of women that are also veterans experiencing homelessness. Now, while the formula on the bottom of this side is also fairly simple, it's really important to remember that you need to ensure you are dividing by the correct number. An example is, for veterans, you are only dividing by the number of adults. You are not dividing by the total number of people because, as we know, children cannot be veterans. So below are two examples of data points that we derived from this exact type of analysis. One example demonstrates a way to use written text in conjunction with icons. The other demonstrates a simple pie chart that can be used to clearly demonstrate the comparison of two data points. Now, if you're a little concerned or you're a little overwhelmed about the concept of potentially using the wrong numbers, what I recommend is writing out the question that you're trying to answer and making sure that you are then associating that text with the correct number on your report, like I did here based off of the color coding. So I don't want to move too quickly through this, so I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there are any questions about using PIT data as your comparison tool. Okay. So now let's take it one step further. The most complex analysis I'm going to go through in the presentation today is when you compare two separate data sets. On this slide, we're talking about the census in comparison to the point-in-time count because both data sets attempt to count the entire population. And what I mean by that is that the census aims to count every person in a geographical area, while the PIT getting fuddled in my words. The PIT count aims to count every individual experiencing homelessness in a geographical area. Now, while it may look intimidating, this analysis is just building off the exact formula on the last slide. You're just going to be doing it twice with each data set. This is a really valuable analysis to do because it can highlight demographic disparities across race, gender, and/or ethnicity. On the screen, you will see a screenshot of the racial disparity we are seeing in the Texas Balance of State Geography using the current year's PIT data, as well as the most recent census data from 2020. Now, while we're talking about this, I do want to highlight that much like our point-in-time count data, the census data was also severely affected by COVID-19 and a lack of reporting. So I do want to highlight that you should be aware of that as you are using any data sets that rely largely on self-report and surveys, is that there is always going to be some type of gap in the lack of full reporting. A quick note about the census data in particular is that it is a bit difficult to navigate, and we only recommend that you do this if you're fairly confident working with large data sets. If you're not confident analyzing complex data, you're always more than welcome to send a request to data@thn.org to assist you. Before we move on from this slide, because I have found that the census data is a little bit hard to navigate on their website, I'm putting in the chat a link where you can find the racial breakdown of the 2020 census data. The reason I'm putting this in here is because when you're trying to pull census data, their website has a number of different tables and surveys that you can utilize, and Alex and I both had to kind of search through the website to find the table that we were looking for. And so to save y'all some time, this is the link that goes directly to all of the counties in Texas, their census data related to race. Okay, so the final analysis that I'm going to discuss is using your point-in-time count and your housing inventory count data. So this data snapshot that's on the screen is meant to demonstrate the gaps in housing to serve those identified as experiencing homelessness through the PIT count. The housing inventory count was utilized to demonstrate the permanent housing inventory because it is the most comprehensive housing data set we have across our geography, and because the end goal is to have folks permanently housed instead of temporarily housed, such as in emergency shelter or transitional housing. Permanent housing beds include both rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing beds. These permanent housing beds that I have listed here are not the vacant housing, but they are in fact the ones that are in use or filled on the night of the pit count. This type of analysis can be really powerful to help demonstrate the need in your community, as well as what your community's current capacity is to respond to that need. It's really helpful when you're talking about advocacy, particularly advocacy for funding going to housing solutions or advocating for more affordable housing within your community. Luckily, this template is already something that we have developed and we have sent folks in the past and are more than happy to send along again if you don't want to start from scratch. All it is that it requires for you to manually fill in each of the associated boxes with the data that you are utilizing, whether that is your county level PIT data or your region level PIT data or sometimes your city. And then you do the subtraction as outlined in the third column that's highlighted in orange titled Inventory Gap. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but I do want to pause here in case folks want me to go back over any of the analysis points in the last couple slides, because then we're going to move into presentation suggestions. Okay. So for those of you who are not familiar with presenting data, or you want to brainstorm some ways to get more confident with your presentation, here are some of the tips and tricks that I have learned over the years. And I do want to highlight that I came into this role with no experience presenting data. So it is possible to get very confident fairly quickly when you're referencing point in time count data or really any other data set. The first thing that I want to say is finding your talking points is really helpful. Talking points are the main highlights you want people to take away from your presentation, which can be very helpful to keep your audience engaged. You'll notice that something that Alex and I did throughout this presentation, as well as presentations you've seen us do in the past, is that we don't want to just give you the report and just read it to you. We want to highlight some of the different things that we are seeing so it allows you to not be too overwhelmed by just the numbers on the report. The next thing that I would say is, much like I did earlier in this presentation, it's important to talk about variables in your community that may have impacted the data. Some of those variables can include the number of volunteers, the amount of time spent on hotspot mapping, day of count logistics like the severe winter weather that I highlighted, and any other specific obstacles you may have encountered, like maybe your community had a severe COVID spike 2 days before the point in time count, but it was too late to move it. The next piece that I want to highlight is, as we know, people have different learning styles, and as much as you can, I recommend trying to find ways to play into all of them. Just like what Alex and I did in this presentation, a mixture of visual elements such as text, pictures, and charts, as well as audio, like talking through it, can help ensure that your audience is interacting with the data in the way that makes the most sense to them. The next thing that I'll say, it's something that you've heard me say time and time again when I talk about practicing your PIT surveys, but it's really making sure that you're practicing your presentation out loud. This will help you develop confidence as well as help you anticipate some of the questions that you might be asked during your presentation. If you are realizing, though, that as you are practicing or as you are developing your materials, you're not feeling very confident about presenting the data, you're also more than welcome to reach out to data@thn.org so staff can work with you on either developing your talking points, attending the meeting with you to assist, or any other way that we can provide guidance and support. One caveat I want to add is that THN staff will have to assess our capacity, and we will attempt to accommodate all requests, but it's not guaranteed. The best way that you will have success is allowing us a minimum of 1 month notice of your request if it involves any specialized materials needing to be created. And finally, a quick note about infographics. So I know that infographics are the main thing that communities want to use and that folks ask for throughout the point in time count season, especially the reporting season. If you feel confident making graphics, they are absolutely a wonderful tool because you can use them in a presentation or send them out on their own via email or social media. But if you are not confident, you can have just as much impact by writing blog posts with simple visuals like what I included. You can create specialized PowerPoints like this one, or you could even release small, what we call data snapshots, like the ones that I had screenshotted throughout my couple slides, to go over important data elements like the ones that relate to your talking points that you want folks to focus on. It's really important to remember that there is not one correct way to present data. Now, another way to spice up your presentation and also give yourself a break from talking and summarizing for folks is to utilize some interactive polling and prompting questions. Not only does this help you ensure that your audience is understanding what you're presenting, but it also gives them a level of autonomy over what they take from the presentation. The more connected they feel with the data, the more likely they are to find the presentation impactful. Here are some examples of questions that I've used in the past, such as, what about this data? What is this data telling you? What about it surprises or confuses you? What other data would you like to see? And finally, if you take absolutely nothing else from this presentation, please remember that you are not expected to know everything. There may be times that a question is asked that you don't know the answer to, or you might become flustered when somebody makes a statement that you weren't prepared for. And here are some of the many phrases I have said, and I'm sure y'all have heard me say them in the past too, when I run into this situation. Just remember, be honest, speak with confidence, and know that it is absolutely okay to not be perfect in your presentation. So before we get into the official Q&A, I want to highlight some of the many THN resources you can utilize to assist you on your journey to talking about your data. When you download this presentation, they'll all be hyperlinked here for your convenience, but a high-level overview of what they are. The first one is something that you might have seen in the past if you're a pit lead that has participated several years in a row, which is an infographic I created about how to use your pit data after the count. So it walks you through some of the different softwares that we at THN use to develop infographics. It also talks about the different ways and the different contexts in which you could talk about your point in time count data. The next one is, I'm not kidding, an infographic on the steps to creating an infographic. Because y'all know me, I'm a very visual learner, so I found that it was really helpful laying out the steps for myself in order to help me understand how to develop an infographic. Because again, I came in without that experience, and now y'all tend to lean on me for infographic creation. So it is very much so possible to get to a place where you're feeling confident making them. And then finally, I have the hyperlink to our website that has all of the current PIT and HIC reports. So that was the end of our content for today's training, but we wanted to save some time for Q&A. I'm hoping that folks have some questions, and they can be related to anything that we've gone over. They can be unrelated. This is y'all's time to chat in anything that you have questions about, concerns about, anything.
I did end up getting a DM question from Nancy, and she asked, "Do you know when the infographics for BOS will be posted on your website? We would like to include them." I would like to mention that we are still working on the infographic, and we plan on having that out along with our official blog post regarding the results of the 2022 pit count at the end of June. So the end of next month is when we plan on having that infographic out.
If folks don't have questions, I'm also curious if y'all want to like type into the chat letting us know. This is the first time that we've done this presentation, and so we are very open and encourage any feedback that you want to give us on whether this was helpful, if you were hoping that something else would be covered that wasn't, anything that we can utilize to help inform our experience, especially as Alex is taking over this role. Seeing some typing, so we will just hold here. This is helpful. So Amanda said, this is helpful. I already presented the PIT data at our Homeless Coalition meeting, and there were a lot of ideas you mentioned that I didn't do, but I think great ideas for presenting the data in different settings. Absolutely. Yes, Amanda, there's definitely not one right way to do things, and I am constantly learning. Also, I don't think that it's ever a problem to present data again, right? Like you might learn a lesson, then you might be, oh, I found this one other thing that I want to talk about. So just being really open to that experience and to being flexible with things, I think is great. I think the report itself is easy to understand, so that is a big help. It definitely is. It also saves quite a bit of time from having to format reports in a way that makes sense. So I'm glad that for the most part, it seems like the report is easy, one, for you to understand, and then for you to be able to explain to folks. Does anybody else have any feedback that they want to share with us? You'll also be given an opportunity. There's a follow-up survey that will be sent to you, and then we're also going to be developing a follow-up survey to help inform our experience. But is there anything else folks want to say in the chat now, or even to ask other community partners how you've been presenting your data, how that's gone? Yeah, no, I don't super mind sitting in silence, but it's not my favorite. So we'll sit here for about another minute just in case folks are gathering their thoughts before I pass the mic back to Alex to do the summary and wrap up. All right. It's looking like we're getting off easy today, Alex. I will pass it back to you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Kira. I'm glad this stuff is making sense to y'all. So for general pit count questions for 2020, excuse me, I can't talk either today. For general pit count questions for 2022 or for this upcoming year's pit count, please email me at alex@thn.org. And for specialized pit reports, presentation requests, or other data requests, please email data@thn.org and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So the reports were already emailed out to all pit leads and posted on the THN website as well. But I would also like to mention that if you want additional pit reports pulled by either city or towns or particular zip codes within your region, you can go ahead and email me with those inquiries as well, and I can get you pit reports for individualized cities or towns within your region if you're interested in seeing that kind of data. I also want to mention we are still working on our blog post and our infographic that will be out by the end of next month. So, the end of June, expect us to email you with that 2022 Texas Balance of State COC infographic and the blog post. All right, so with that being said, we want to thank you all for attending this webinar today. I really hope it's been informative and helpful for everybody here. Again, if there's any other questions that you have regarding anything PIT related, please do not hesitate to email me with any inquiries that you might have. I also want to let you know, again, today's webinar has been recorded and it will be posted online for you to reference at any time. And I also want to thank y'all for everything you do. This year's pit count would not be possible without your hard work and dedication, and we greatly appreciate your commitment to ending homelessness in Texas. So, with that being said, I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.